Hello, I would like to welcome everyone to the second event within the UNIDO series on webinar series on quality and standards in the fight against COVID-19. My name is Dorina Nati. The series of webinars organized by the UNIDO Department of Trade, Investment and Innovation started earlier this week. We already had a webinar session on organizational resilience in times of COVID-19. The topic was presented by Mr. Osama El-Milgheli from Egypt. Today, the session will focus on testing and standards in the fight against the global pandemic. We have 5 panelists today and more than 300 attendees have registered to follow the discussion online. Thank you all for being here with us today. The session will start with a short keynote statement followed by a panel discussion and a question and answer sessions. For the attendees, you are encouraged to post your questions in the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. We will then select the most relevant questions and pose them to the panelists. Please, due to time constraints, consider that we might not be able to answer all your questions. We want to apologize in advance if this is the case. Having said that, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Ms. Elsie Meintjes. Elsie Meintjes is an expert in quality and standards. Throughout her professional career, she has held senior and executive positions in quality infrastructure institutions in South Africa and Botswana. Since 2011, Elsie has been facilitating national and regional technical cooperation projects, mainly in the area of trade and trade capacity building. Currently, she is a chief technical advisor for UNIDO's Global Quality and Standards Program in South Africa. We're very pleased that she will be moderating today's session. Elsie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dorina.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to recognize each and every VIP to this webinar. These VIPs are all our panelists and all our participants. A very hearty welcome to you on this Friday afternoon. Within the framework of the SDGs and against the backdrop of promoting inclusive and sustainable industrial development, the global, the continental and the country level quality infrastructure has and will continue to play a very significant role in the fight against the global pandemic that we are facing at the moment. Within the webinar series, as Dorina has already indicated, the series of quality and standards in the fight against COVID-19, we assembled a prestigious international panel who has agreed to share with us, firstly, during a first round of questions and discussions, the reactions of standards and testing quality infrastructure institutions in the fight against COVID-19, and in a second round, to share with us some views on how the quality infrastructure can adapt and evolve in the medium to long term, given the experience of COVID-19 pandemic. After the second round of discussions, I would just like to confirm again, there will be a question and answer session, and our participants to the webinar, we invite you to please log your questions electronically and send them through to us as the questions arise, and then we will deal with them during the question and answer session. So the participants, we invite you to participate via the question and answer session. I would now like to introduce the panelists in the order in which we will invite them to make their valuable contribution. The first is Mr. Bernardo Calzadilla Sarmiento, who is the Director Trade, Industry and Innovation at UNIDO. He's joining us from Vienna, Austria. I would then like to recognize Mr. Sean MacCurtain, who is the Director of Conformity Assessment, the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, and he is joining us from a little village, but I'm just going to say Geneva, Switzerland, okay? Then I would like to recognize Mr. Andy Henderson, Henson, who's the Director of International Liaison and Communication Department at the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, the BIPM, and Andy is joining us from Paris in France. Then I'm very happy to have a fellow lady with me this afternoon, Ms. Merih Malmqvist Nilsson. She's currently the chair of the International Network of Quality Infrastructure, and she's joining us from Sweden. And last but not least, I would like to recognize Mr. Xiao, who is the chair of the International Accreditation Forum, and he's joining us from China. And in China, it's getting close to midnight, so thank you very much for staying up for this event. Then a special welcome to the participants. I see that approximately 260 have currently logged in, although we did have registration of 311. And these participants come from all over at the moment. The last count, it was from 15 countries. And I think it's important that we recognize these countries, so please bear with me. It's Austria, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, Indonesia, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, Peru, Sierra Leone, South Africa, Switzerland, Turkey, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, and Vietnam. Thank you very much to our participants for sharing this very important time with us. So let us go to round one. And in the order that the panelists were introduced, round one, we will be asking each of the panelists to make a contribution regarding the reaction of their specific quality infrastructure institution to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. But to set the scene, I would like to invite our director, Mr. Bernardo, let me call him Bernardo, to set the scene for us. Bernardo, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just see if I can turn on the screen. I lost the link for that. Here it goes. Can you see my screen? Yeah, can you see it? Yeah, thank you very much. So good afternoon, everybody. Yes, we are so excited, I would say, to be here in this moment of confinement and in the middle of a crisis where we are together. And I'm happy that the panelists and everybody has joined this dialogue in relation to what we're doing is to see how we can respond to the crisis, but in particular, we would like to see how quality and standards can help to respond to the crisis. I would like to specifically mention in UNIDO, we are already 1 month at home. It has been quite a time. I feel it's a long time we're in our homes. And a lot of studies have been done, and I think there is a lot of analysis, a lot of action has continued to be taking place. We are happy that at UNIDO, because we immediately deployed a strategy, we could continue, we had a business continuity plan, so we could continue working, and we have then also started to shift some of our activities. But as I was invited to share a bit the context, as you know, UNIDO has been working in a document recently called Rebooting Quality Infrastructure for Sustainability. And this is the approach I would like to take to introduce the topic. This means that I would like to see the crisis in the grid, in the framework of the SDGs, of the Sustainable Development Framework. And we are all conscious that we are facing a very heavy health crisis, but what is important for us is also that the consequences are of economic nature. In the short term, we are witnessing a lot of people that are getting jobless. We know that many people live on the day by day. Coming from Bolivia, I'm very sensitive to that, and it's very difficult for people to spend 1 week, 2 weeks at home. So we think that the situation, the crisis, is jeopardizing the achievement of the SDGs in a broader perspective. And for this, we have tried to follow the framework of the SDGs. I would rather call the big pillars: people, planet, and prosperity. And in that framework, we made a brief analysis on how the different aspects are challenging our reality. As you know, we have, first of all, the health crisis. We have a trade crisis. We have a deep trade crisis in relation to certain goods, but also immediately, and this started in China most probably, we had the disruption of the supply chain. And the disruption of the supply chain in China has brought about, already before the health crisis started in the Western economies, it started to bring problems to production, to the value chain, to what was happening. So, and the crisis in the supply chain is bringing problems of investment, I would say even of divestment, and so forth. So, but looking from the angle of people, trade, people, planet, and prosperity, let me mention eventually the SDGs, for example, SDG 2, focusing on food security. Trade along the value chain is important to have the sustainable supply of essential goods. A very important part of the problem is hygiene practices. Food safety standards are very important. We have a number of standards that deal with it. In the health, which is in the middle of the crisis, I think the name of the day is reliable results. We need results, we need testing, we need to know how competence is accredited, how is trust built, how is confidence built. And from our business, we are quality experts. Quality control is at the core of what we do, but it is more important when we are talking about medical equipment that needs to be fit for purpose, needs to be used by the overall population, but in particular by the health sector. And sure, we at UNIDO, we work with laboratories, with accreditation, but we work also with laboratories dealing with the sector, with new medicine, vaccines, but even with medical laboratories. If we look a bit broader in planet, I would say that the implication in the very short term has been positive because there was lockdown. In China, we started to see blue skies. We started to see that the environment has had some breath, but this is very short term. I think the important is to recall that this process is bringing a lot of hazardous waste, medical waste, and this is again where standards can play a role. Also, laboratories can help us to detect pollution, and we need, in the broader perspective, and here I will name SDG goal 17, we need to have international cooperation in the health sector for vaccines, etc. But the situation will also need that we address SDG 16, where it is about governance, it's about peace. In many countries, we will eventually be facing the risk of social unrest. So the framework of the SDGs gives us the opportunity to really look a bit broader. From the UNIDO perspective, there is no doubt that at the core of our activity, we are talking about economic consequences, and trade is at the middle. I mentioned it already. Trade is contracting. There is a crisis. There was even a crisis in cross-border. There was a crisis of limiting the authorization to trade with medical goods, with vital medicine. There is competition for that, which is very difficult to understand in a time where we need solidarity. But we are also seeing that a lot of importance is that we need a mechanism, what I call the mechanism to build confidence, such as mutual recognition. SDG 9, quality infrastructure, ensures the identification, dissemination of standards, accurate measurement, and provides attestation of results. We need reliable results, and we have a number of standards to ensure the mitigation of the crisis. And at this moment, since I'm starting this discussion, I'm focusing on the crisis itself, not on the post-recovery, because probably in the post-recovery, this will be also at the core where we have innovation, standards for new technologies, etc. And finally, also to mention that in the crisis itself, we have a lot of standards, and such as business continuity. We had this first webinar on organizational resilience that can help us to prepare and to cope with the crisis, but also that we need to have the goods are still fit for purpose and that they are good for the workers. It's also a time where we need standards like occupational health and safety as soon as we start thinking that we will have to go back to work. I hope Elsie is not looking at the time, but I'm already there. This is the summary. We prepared a graph trying to summarize this analysis. Here we have elaborated in a document which is a bit more extensive, but we wanted to show a bit how does it link together, how COVID, the SDGs, and our area. It is time for us, and thank you the partners, the partners from the international organizations of quality infrastructure. We need to show the relevance of our services in the crisis and in the response after the crisis. I just wanted to mention also, because we are in these times, I posted this in LinkedIn. It had already 5,000 views. I have never had this situation. This flyer had over 5,000 views and over 150 people that replicated that, send it back. So I think that this is the scenario in which we are, and we need to further think how can we continue advocating the importance of standardization, quality infrastructure, and metrology to cope with the crisis and also to cope with the post-corona crisis and the re-emergence, because the process will bring us to a new era. I think that this is a disruptive moment where we have also a lot of opportunities in which we can see that we will change and we will do for the better. And hopefully we can also work towards sustainability. Thank you very much. Elsie, back to you.
Thank you very much, Bernardo, for that intervention. And I must say, I'm very heartened to hear that we've had such a good response to the LinkedIn that you have posted. And thank you for setting the scene. And I would now, when we talk about quality infrastructure, there's absolutely nothing we can do without a standard. That's where it all starts. And therefore, we're now going to give the floor to Sean MacCurtain, the director at ISO, to tell us how ISO has been making their contribution regarding what ISO has been doing, what their reaction has been to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. Sean, over to you.
Hello, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank UNIDO for giving us the opportunity to participate in this. We see it as a very valuable communication tool. And it's a pleasure to share with you what ISO and the ISO community have been doing. I think in terms of just setting the background, we all recognize that standards are a means of sharing knowledge and best practice. And standards really reflect the consensus of experts at the global level and at the national level. So they all contain the most up-to-date information with regard to whatever subject they are dealing with. So it's really vital that we're in a position to share that information with the global community in times like this. So in coordination with IEC, we are making, or we have made freely available, a number of standards aimed at supporting the COVID-19 crisis. And these are, although they're read-only, they're available on the ISO website, but they're also available on the websites of the ISO member bodies at the national level. In addition to those standards, and I'll talk a little bit about them a little bit later, but in addition to those standards, the ISO member bodies in individual countries are also making available additional national standards that address specific issues in relation to the current situation, which are specific to the country. And I would encourage everyone to go to their websites and to see what is available with regards to that. Basically, we've got two categories of standards that we are making freely available. The first are system orientated. So they're looking at management systems that can be put in place that can allow you to mitigate the consequences arising from a situation like we're in. And probably the most well-known one of those is ISO 22301, which is Business Continuity Management System. And that is really there to ensure continuity of vital functions within an organization. So it will assist organizations at every level, whether they're SMEs or big multinationals, in literally identifying the vital functions that they need to keep going to be able to come back online later after the crisis has passed. It also offers a recovery plan and how to do that with respect to it. The other one on the system side is risk management. And that actually shares guidance on how to manage risk, how to identify risk, and the things you need to consider to be able to mitigate it. Then the second category is more focused on technical standards, standards related to medical devices. And when I talk about a medical device, I'm talking about anything from a mask, a thermometer, to gloves, to ventilators, to breathing apparatus, etc. And I think these standards are also vital, and we've seen that they're even more vital when organizations want to be able to switch their manufacturing from manufacturing dresses or clothing to manufacturing masks. So the availability of these can actually look at helping the supply chain. And that goes also from manufacturing vacuum cleaners to ventilators. So the availability of these type of standards is crucial with respect to it. The second aspect that I'd like to address is that in line with the WHO guidelines, you all know that ISO brings people together, experts together in meetings. Right from the very beginning, we operated within the WHO guidelines. Every governance and technical committee cannot be held face-to-face. They all have to be held virtually until the 31st of July when it will be reviewed, or else postponed. Now, part of that is there are certain standards that need to continue to be developed. So technical committees had to prioritize their work programs in order to identify these and to decide to hold virtual meetings. This propelled us. ISO is probably in a slightly better position because we have allowed virtual participation for many years in our meetings. But the pandemic propelled us into a whole new scenario in this, in that it was only going to be virtual meetings. So we had to look at that capacity. We had to extend our capacity. We had to look at the platforms we provided to ensure things like security, etc. So from an IT perspective, we managed quite well. But the next step was, how do you manage a meeting with 50 people in it? So what we did was we quickly developed guidelines, updated our guidelines to conveners, chairs, how to run a meeting, how to allow participation, how to get consensus, etc. in connection with that. In addition to that, we looked at how can we accommodate the obstacles that are placed in terms of the timing. So the TMB, which is the Technical Management Board in ISO, took a flexible approach to the rules. They adapted the rules to give technical committees and working groups the opportunity to have flexible timelines, and these have been made available. I'm not going to go into them because they're too detailed, but it does accommodate the extra time that sometimes committees might need to finish off their standards. From a conformity assessment perspective, I think we are learning to cooperate with the other quality infrastructure institutions. We're looking at being able to handle queries and issues as they arise so that we don't become a hindrance in terms of the whole process, but also identifying things for later on. From a capacity building perspective and helping developing countries, I think we've got to recognize that they are behind the rest of the world in terms of the impact. So one of the things that we have done within ISO is we've set up a platform where members who have gone through the pandemic and have actually experienced it can put their best practice and share it with our other members. We are adapting the developing countries action plan so that we look at things and use and utilize e-learning where we can with respect to it, and also to continuing our good standardization practice that we work with together with UNIDO in terms of it. So they're generally the things that we're doing. Thank you. I hope I didn't go on too long.
Thank you very much, Sean. I'm very pleased to hear that those who have been through the pandemic, or that has been hit hard by the pandemic, are willing to share their experiences, because I think we can all learn from it in the future. That's the heartening side. On the social side, I think for the next panelist, I don't think I can think of a time where measurement has been more important than what it is right now. So I would like to hand over to Andy Henson from the BIPM to give us their reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you for the invite to be able to talk to everybody today. Well, of course, for us, there's a number of different aspects which have a different impact on the operation of the BIPM. On the one hand, we operate laboratories which require people to be present in them, which is a real challenge at the moment. But crucially, what we are able to keep going right now is the operation of the databases that are critical around the world. And the two real key ones here are the CaseDB, which underpin the measurements of the NMIs, and through them all the accredited measurements around the world, and also the JCTLM, so that's the database of the Joint Committee for Traceability in Laboratory Medicine. So we are able to do that. We're able to operate quite well remotely. I'm sat at home doing this. My team are busy sat at home working. We hope to restart laboratory activities in the not too distant future, albeit at a lower level. But the time isn't wasted for the laboratory staff, because they're able to do data analysis and plan protocols and so on. So long as we're able to get back in the near future, we can keep that side going. But I'd like to talk a little bit more widely than just the Institute. Next week, for example, the working groups of the CCQM, so that's the consultative committee that deals with chemistry and biology, will be meeting. They'll be meeting virtually, but very high on their agenda are things like looking at the reference materials that we need for the antibodies and antigens to be able to tackle this virus. The first one's already coming out now. We need international comparability of those. It's too early to say what will come out of that, but one could imagine some sort of comparison exercise in the future. It's far from trivial. It's more complicated than you might think. So in the antibodies, for example, you have the mono and the poly approaches, which are really quite different, advantages and disadvantages to both. So it's when you're doing something like a comparison exercise, you really need to have some firm pinning of what it is you're trying to achieve before you're able to do that, to try and get the international comparability. Indeed, the Secretary of Health, the Minister of Health in the UK, said on the 3rd of April, he was talking in the Prime Minister's briefing, And he said his words were something like, it's better to not test at all than to test and get it wrong. And this is critical at two different levels. One, for the individual, of course, if you were tested and found to be okay and you're not, it's disastrous. But also because you're trying to understand how this epidemic is hitting your population as well. And for that, you need the test results. And if you're getting them wrong, just quite easy to do. The tests for the antibodies, for example, can easily detect the wrong thing. The coronavirus is a broad church of different viruses, so you've got to make sure you're testing the right thing. So getting the measurements right has never been more important than it is today. Separately from the actual testing the virus itself, of course, there's a whole bunch of other things that matter to the environments that we're talking about here. The performance of masks, for example, face masks are really critical. It has to be tested. That involves measurement. Ventilators, their performance, and so on. And more widely, things like the analysis of the data, understanding the aerosol effect, for example, the research topics as well. So all this activity, if you look around on the web pages of the National Metrology Institute, you will see them gearing up or already beginning to work on these types of aspects. There's a lot to do. For us as well, one of the things that's hit is our capacity building and knowledge transfer program. We've had to cancel, we had courses arranged, people organized to go on those courses. We've had in the urgency to postpone those. So we'll be looking in the shorter term to see if we can deliver them through these type of media. With some adjustment, I think we can do that, and we'll be looking to do that in the not too distant future. In the longer term, well, we'll come back to longer term issues, but I certainly think we're going to see much more use of e-learning tools, for example. So really, that's the crucial points I wanted to say. We say standards are important and testing is important, but behind them all, you have the metrology. If you're not getting the right answer in this sort of crisis, you have an absolute disaster beyond the obvious disaster.
Thank you, Andy, for that valuable contribution. Yes, I don't think there's any test result is worth anything unless the metrology behind it is correct. So let's move on, and we'll invite now Merih from INetQI. Merih, I'd like to ask you, given your experience as previously a deputy director of the Swedish accreditation body, SWEDAC, your chairing of the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation, ILAC, for the period ending being 2016 to 2018, which is actually quite recent. And then as in your role as current chair of the INetQI, would you please share with us some insights as to the testing capacity of health services and the testing of goods?
Okay, you can all hear me? Yes, okay. Well, I first have to say that because INetQI is a network, the hard work around the coronavirus is being done by all the institutions which are members of the INetQI. So as such, as a network, we haven't actually done very much concerning what's going on with the coronavirus. But, and there's a big but, and I'll elaborate on that both now and maybe if I get the chance later on in the webinar. This pandemic has very clearly shown the importance of conformity assessment in general and testing in particular. It has become very obvious that testing has a crucial role in the provision of reliable healthcare services. So we're talking about tested and certified personal protective equipment. We're talking about reliable tests, laboratory tests for detection of the disease. And we're talking about tested and certified medical instruments like ventilators and the whole lot that's being used in emergency services. Now, I do not have statistics from around the world, and that's why some of the things that we're talking about now become more philosophical. We do what we can now, but we don't know the result. But I'm sure we'll be able to collect information and look back and analyze how we could have done instead to have a better result. But to the best of my knowledge, laboratories are still providing services to their communities unless there's a total shutdown. And even when there is a total shutdown, our governments and regulators realize the importance of laboratory testing, and those facilities are being treated like essential services by many communities. And that's the status they should have in the long run. We have also seen, in particular in my vicinity here in Northern Europe, I've seen accredited laboratories and research institutes coming together with manufacturers to cut lead time for testing of new products essential for healthcare services, so that people are really exerting an extra effort to cut the time that is required. And this, of course, means a shift of priority for all these testing laboratories and testing services, whether they're medical or mechanical or something else. This crisis has many dimensions, and unfortunately, many of them are political. However, one thing is certain, that the availability of reliable personal protective equipment, medical devices, and testing procedures have been a crucial factor in the efficiency of the medical services provided to patients. So I think the whole thing has made it very obvious for our political decision makers that conformity assessment is important, that it's a crucial service that the society needs, and that it should be treated as such. Let us hope they don't forget it once this is over. And I would also like to say a little about the role of testing and conformity assessment in the global value chains. I believe I've recently read an article by an institution which calls itself European Center for International Political Economy. And they're claiming that there are no disruptions to global value chains. There are only disruptions, or mainly disruptions, to country, national or economic, within one economy, global chain, value chains. So looking at it from different angles, maybe we should decide that on that one, the jury is still out, and we'll know first later on how this works. But sticking to the testing and the role of testing and the role of conformity assessment in global value chains, I don't think we have ever really thought in those terms in our community, in the quality infrastructure community. We haven't seen the services provided as an integral part of the value chain. And that is probably due to the fact that we are way down the service line, and what the market sees is the final product. And what we realize here is that unless we actively work to create global trust in every single conformity assessment from every part of the world, in a time like this, we will revert to nationalism and protectionism. And we're seeing this in the speeches that are being made. I have recently watched a person from an authority convincing public procurement and other procurement services that medical devices that have been tested and approved by other countries outside our region are also reliable, that they should rely on them. Now, we shouldn't need to be saying this. So we need actively to work to create global trust. And in a time like this, as I said, it's easy to revert to nationalism and protectionism. And it's very sad if we today cannot rely on testing to have been done properly when it is delivered from another part of the world. It is a huge failure for all the work we have done. The same problem arises with factories which change their production lines to produce maybe personal protective equipment and chemicals which are needed for medical care. The route to the market is a long and winding road, and it goes through testing, it goes through regulatory approval. But we have also seen that there's a shift, that the testing laboratories have quickened their paces, they have become more flexible. but regulators are still rather slow and afraid of making the wrong decision. So this just shows the vulnerability of our system. And I'm being very critical here, but I do want to be that because we need to change. It's bureaucratic, it's time consuming, and it's costly, and it shouldn't be. So if our systems were fully sustainable as such, it would mean that all conformity assessment bodies and accreditation bodies had plans for unusual times as these, and that they would be just as efficient in these times, if not more, than in times of so-called normality. So quickly reprioritizing and becoming flexible should be part of the business. Now, this is from me so far. I don't think I really answered your core question, but I think the answer to that one will come later. We don't have data on that right now. Thank you, Elsie.
Thank you, Merih. I think you've set the scene for our next speaker absolutely perfectly when you said the words, creating global trust. So with that, let me give the floor to Mr. Xiao to tell us what the International Accreditation Forum, what their reaction has been.
Thank you, Elsie. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to join this e-panel as the chair of IF. Thank you, UNIDO, to organize this event and give me the opportunity to share relevant information of IF. In response to the impacts of COVID-19, IF has taken a number of actions. As a general response, IF released a statement on COVID-19 with a general message regarding how IF member accreditation bodies and their accredited certifying bodies are to respond to this situation. The general mechanism established by IF in IF ID 3 to respond to extraordinary circumstances affecting accreditation bodies, certifying bodies, and certified organizations was therefore activated. And this IF statement also instructed the accreditation bodies and the certification bodies to follow the requirements on how to use information and communication technologies to support and maintain the integrity of the audit and assessment process, as defined in IF MD4, that is IF mandatory document for the use of information and communication technology for auditing and assessment purpose. Then, as a specific response, a joint IF-ILAC statement on possible delayed peer evaluations and impact on transition to ISO IEC 17011 was released, which actually includes guidelines how to manage peer evaluations and transition to the new version of ISO IEC 17011, the requirement for accreditation bodies. Going further, IF created a rapid response mechanism at the IF Executive Committee level. An IF COVID-19 FAQ task force was established to develop IF frequently asked questions in a fast process to provide further guidance for IF member accreditation bodies and their accredited certifying bodies to manage relevant accreditation and certification activities in a harmonized way under the situation of COVID-19. As a result of this mechanism, a series of FAQs has been published on the IF website. I'm not going to go to details for the FAQ, even they are important regarding how to handle specific issues related to accredited certifications in current situation. Additionally, IF has also reacted to assist specific areas. For example, the IF Food Working Group Task Force preparing information on remote auditing activities for accredited food safety certification. The remote auditing and assessment as per IF MD4 and also other IF documents have been greatly implemented in accreditation and certification activities, comparing with the normal situation prior to this COVID-19 pandemic. The IF COVID-19 FAQs actually contributed to the use of the remote auditing and assessment methodologies. So IF's main priority during this challenging time is supporting IF member accreditation bodies, their accredited certifying bodies, and certified organizations to maintain a robust accredited certification and ensure certified organizations are served in the best way possible so that the accredited certifications continue its rules to facilitate trade, support regulators, and protect consumers and the environment during this period of time in the fight against the COVID-19 and the support to the resumption of industry. So in short, I would like to highlight 2 points for IF's response to COVID-19. One is good preparedness. Through IF documents such as we call ID3 and MD4, IF and its members were in a good place to be able to continue their accreditation work and to allow accredited conformity assessment bodies to continue their work where they can because of the existence of these IF documents. Another point is rapid reaction. Backing up these documents, IF responded very promptly and sensibly with its statements and the setting up of the IF COVID-19 FAQ task force. And in particular, this task force's tight schedule of 48-hour turnaround of questions, which has enabled questions to be raised and addressed in a robust and a time manner. So that means a question was raised within 48 hours, we have an answer. Then we post the FAQ. So this is major actions taken by IF in response to the impact of COVID-19. So Elsie, now back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiao. Well, I think this ends the first round of questions, and I think what is very clear is that the international quality infrastructure institutions, the organizations have been very proactive in dealing with this issue, and that they've also been very supportive of their members in dealing with the pandemic. What is also clear from what has been discussed so far is that the need to change, that for the quality infrastructure organizations to change, is very clear. The writing is on the wall. We have to start being nimble. We have to be proactive. This has been mentioned several times by virtually all of the speakers. So with that, having set the scene that there is need for change, I'd like us to proceed to round 2, but before I proceed to round 2, I would just please like to invite our participants once again to submit questions that we can deal with. If we do not get to your particular question, we will afterwards see how we can deal with it and then disseminate the information if it becomes available at a later date. So for round 2 questions, and we will take the speakers in the same order, starting with ISO. So here in round 2, we're going to discuss how the quality infrastructure institutions can adapt and evolve in the medium to long term, given the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, so that we can address the various economic and social impacts of the pandemic. And not just of the pandemic, but because there's bound to be another crisis at some stage. And we need to make sure that our business response, our business continuity, our risk assessments, et cetera, are all in place. I think that's very clear given this latest pandemic. So Sean, let's start with you. ISO adapting and evolving.
So I think in connection with looking at all the quality infrastructure institutions, I think we've really got to recognize what the new reality is. And that's vital if we're going to move forward. The new reality is that we are looking at virtual health. We're looking at telemedicine. We're looking at a wider use of e-commerce, a wider use of e-learning. We're looking at how do we mobilize the workforce or remobilize the workforce into different areas, and the impact of automation on jobs. So I think as institutions, we've got to reflect on these and understand that we have to go forward and be able to provide to governments, to industry, to professions like the healthcare profession, to science and technology, a really effective basis upon which they can take advantage and move forward in terms of how they handle pandemics. I think a very interesting thing as a side is that we've talked about the importance of testing from a testing perspective. So we said how critical it is from a testing perspective. What we're also recognizing is for economies to recover, industry is asking us to have a testing infrastructure that can accommodate the demands that these kind of pandemics put on. So it's not just the technical correctness, it's a whole infrastructure around that, and I think that is also very crucial. So from a quality institute, a quality infrastructure institution side, I think that we've got to be able to cooperate together, synchronize what we do, and identify where we can cooperate. I think there is a tendency after a situation like this, a pandemic, that people want to get into the recovery. They want to recover as fast, as quickly as possible. And I think that we need to take a little breath and we need to reflect on the lessons learned. So we need to spend time trying to identify what we did well, what we didn't do so well, in actual fact, what we did badly, because that's crucial. This whole idea, we have to communicate in terms of the context of the pandemic, and that requires us to be truthful. So we need to know what we did badly, what we can improve, and what we need to improve, and what we need to change. So I think all the organizations need to spend time looking at what we do with respect to those kind of issues. We need to reflect on the standards that worked in the real world out there under this stress, and where they didn't work under this stress. But even more important, we've got to identify the standards that we're missing. Are there standards that we could have developed that could have helped us that weren't there? A very good example is China has submitted a new work item proposal on temporary hospitals. 2 months ago, how many members or how many people would think that this is a crucial thing? Today, the whole world would think in terms of that. So we've got to look at standards and what we need and how they will work in future with respect to that. Some of the crucial lessons is on the supply chain and the value chain. We did have problems at the national and the international level in terms of supply of masks, of gloves. It wasn't unique to just the national level. Countries were competing for these products. Issues on the food chain and the safety of the food chain. There is supply, but the reaction of humans can actually impact that supply. And we need to be able to accommodate that going forward. migration of people. We're now entering into a stage where in Europe they need to harvest. They do not have sufficient people to harvest with respect to it. So and in addition to that, we've got to ensure that trade functions operate. There has been a tendency for us all to close our borders or to limit the borders in terms of customs and trade. So we've got to look at how can standards and how can we as institutions ensure that trade can flow through borders, that customs officials can allow the flow of goods. I think generally, if we look at what has happened, we have two scenarios going forward. We have difficulties and crises arising from climate change or extreme weather. And I think we're learning how to handle those because we have had experiences and we've built up our plans. And now we have got pandemics. We now have a blueprint. There is a responsibility on every organization, every company, to make sure that we don't get lazy, that we look at these blueprints, we dust them off every now and then, and we make sure that they can respond and continue to respond, covering all of the activities of the institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. We have a blueprint. Andy, let's hear your response.
Okay, I think the question's a really interesting one, and it comes for us in the metrology community at a very interesting time, because back in 2018, we took the decision, the world community took the decision to redefine the International System of Units, with those new definitions coming into force in May 2019. So already that's opened up possibilities. Now, I think one thing we're going to see out after the pandemic is it's forced us to open our minds and change the way we think. Exactly as Sean said, who thought you could build a hospital in a week or 10 days before? It was just an inconceivable thing. So ideas that were before, we were very conservative, we moved very small. If it was going to be 0.25% on the GDP, you couldn't do anything. That rule book is gone, and I don't think it's coming back. I really think it's going to be gone for good. Now, in our world, what does that mean for metrology? Well, we're seeing a number of trends that I think will have an impact going forward. One of those is with redefinition, I think we're going to see an increase in the availability of intrinsic standards. So these are local realizations that can be done of the SI without coming back always to just the really big leading laboratories. We have seen this in the work of some of the leading labs, NIST and PTB and MPL and so on, going in this direction. So this can be considered perhaps as the democratization of measurement. I've heard those words used in the US to describe this. But this brings into the points made earlier on trade. It only works if you really can rely on the standards. So the issue which the BIPM deals with is the comparability of those results. And so there's clearly going to be a significant task ahead of us to work out what that means. And there's other pressures in the same direction, the different origin, but the same direction. And that's the advent of large numbers of low-cost sensors. You can pick up your mobile phone now and take an app, and it will measure the air pressure, for example. Now you can add that into the weather forecasting and get your local climate in your field or your valley. But that brings big challenges. If you take that up and go up a 10-story building, the sensor will detect what it thinks is a change in the air pressure, and it's actually a change. It is a change in the air pressure, but it's because you've gone up 10 stories and not because the weather is changing. So will the traditional metrological traceability chains in the future, where we calibrate an individual item down a chain to the end user, are they going to be the models that will survive? We don't know the answers to those questions, but we're certainly going to see the advent of low-cost sensors deployed in large numbers. the combination of data to have solutions that are not direct outputs of a single measurement anymore. They're coming large numbers of measurements, perhaps with a large number of parameters, maybe with some artificial intelligence in there as well to give us some sort of prediction. So I think we're going to see a world that is prepared to accept change more readily than was the case before. We were exactly on a particular track with small deviations considered very major. We've thrown that model away. We have to be able to think differently. And so I think it really will have an impact. Coming back more specifically to the crisis we're facing, clearly the availability of appropriate reference materials are really going to be very necessary for these tests that we were talking about earlier. And then the comparability, because you want to be able to take, not just move equipment around and test kits around, but you also want to be able to combine data generated all around the world into your models and know that you're looking at the same data. This data is telling you the same thing when it's trying to measure the same thing. I think one of the things that we might see is a greater use of the SI, the International System of Units, in biological and chemobiological measurements. For reasons that we couldn't do good metrology 20 or 30 years ago in some of these areas, the practice has built up, a necessary practice that was to take a sample and make that standard, and then you ran out of that batch and you made another batch as close as you could. We're nibbling up the molecule size with our metrology, and so you can do SI traceability on quite large molecules nowadays. And that brings the possibility of different techniques and different approaches and still have confidence in the measurement. So I think I hope we'll see a greater use of the International System of Units in the areas that are very critical for this work.
Thank you, Andy. Are you done?
Yep, that's a high-speed run-through.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for that, for giving us insights into some possible future scenarios. And with that, I would like to ask Merih to give us her response to the second question, please. Merih?
So, thank you very much. Well, I tend to get philosophical about the future, so please bear with me. Now, the present pandemic makes it very obvious that if we rely on direct human physical interaction in all our essential services, and essential services we have seen include the QI and the conformity assessment and so on. So all of the QI institutions included. Then we are bound to remain vulnerable in the face of a global crisis. I have personally talked about the fact that QI has to reinvent itself and embrace new technology to remain relevant. And now it seems it has to do that also in order to remain sustainable. So new technology can be the key to the sustainability of our services. I have also talked about how new technology can, in the Industrial Revolution 4.0, can be used to achieve the sustainable development goals and the promise of Agenda 2030. And there are many examples to that today. And I'll bore you with some of those because they are important to remember. We're using drones to pollinate and monitor crops. We have online healthcare services. And in fact, in my vicinity here in Northern Europe, we've had them for some years now, and some of them have even been accepted by the National Health Service. We have intelligent textiles for monitoring patients, so they don't need to be monitored directly with machines, which are more expensive, or human beings and so on. So the clothing, they have monitored the patients. 3D printing will substantially decrease the environmental footprint of production. Technology inventions have been shown in studies to make a meaningful contribution to food security. Blockchain technology has been cited as having a great significance in the development of environmental sustainability. And we have seen data analytics being used for disaster relief efforts. All these solutions, and there are many, the list can be made very long, they are being used in different parts of the world. But how much of this new technology is being used to harness a crisis? And it seems at a time of crisis, we still seem to back away from new technology because none of these technologies have been used on a wider scale. So we need to quickly embrace new technology and test it out so that when we do have the next crisis, and it might not at all be a pandemic, it might be something totally different, then we have tested them. Then we have an answer to any problems that might come up. Also, when we talk about quality, we have generally focused on functionality and safety. And we have talked about using IR 4.0 technologies as a leverage to achieve sustainable development goals, and that we need to take a more holistic approach. It may in fact be the right time to redefine quality as a concept to also include sustainability, which means that the QI institutions will be working to a triple bottom line: functionality, safety, and sustainability. And this needs to be done in relation to each individual product and service. And we cannot only focus on the product or service, and in the QI sense, it's usually the service we're talking about. Not only that being sustainably produced and not contributing to an increased misuse of our resources, but also think about how it can, during its lifetime, contribute to increased sustainability. I would also like to come to the aspect of global value chains, which I've talked about earlier as well. As I said, there are some think tanks who believe global value chains are not being disrupted to the extent we expected. And we can still buy whatever we want to buy, and they're available for us. Maybe there's some delay, but they're still being produced and transported. And they claim that single country value chains are the ones that are mostly being disrupted. That may be true, that may not be true, I don't know, because there are so many different views on this topic. I am more of the type, I believe global value chains are being disrupted, but that remains to be seen, what the result of that will be. And conformity assessment, as I also said before, as a part of the global value chain, if we cannot create the global trust that a test that has been done on another continent is as reliable as the one that we do at home, we have failed hugely. We can just close down shop and go home. And the same applies to new products or new production lines where there's a big need. Some factories have been changing their production to produce personal protective equipment and so on, as I said. And the system for getting these on the market should not be bureaucratic and time-consuming and costly. It should be quick and easy. So whatever we do in normality, because we can afford to have a slow pace, maybe we shouldn't be we should be doing it at that pace in normality either. In short term, I believe countries may look into becoming self-contained. However, consumer preferences and economy will always be a major factor in political decisions. And in the long term, globalization will not die. Global value chains will not die. They will just take a new form. And I think one of the important parameters will be resilience when choosing a partner. You will choose a partner who has resilience, a partner who has contingency plans. And it goes for testing, it goes for conformity assessment, for, I believe, metrology standards, the whole lot, but also for production lines, hardware products. What countries and businesses, including QI institutions, have to do in the long term is to have sustainability, as I said before, and to have rigorous contingency plans, not only for pandemics, but for any risks with catastrophic effects. And I think the global organizations have a big role to play in this. And I'm looking at organizations like ILAC and IAF, which have to really be supportive and find guidance that they can give to their to the member national accreditation bodies or accreditation bodies, and to the conformity assessment bodies who are dependent of the accreditation. Contingency plans have also to be drafted in cooperation with stakeholders. So when the testing and certification and inspection community and the metrology community as well are looking into contingency plans for the future, they have to speak to their stakeholders. Just like governments have to speak to their citizens, they have to speak to their stakeholders. This has to be a joint effort. And finally, I'd like to come to the soft part of this Sustainable Development Goals. Some of those, like no poverty, good health and well-being, zero hunger, gender equality, those will become very important if we are to survive a future similar crisis. If we look at the world as such, and I'm not pointing fingers, I'm on purpose giving you examples from Northern Europe and in particular sometimes from Sweden. Even in a country like Sweden, which is supposed to be very non-discriminatory and gender equal, our doctors talk about healthcare discriminating women, healthcare discriminating other specific ethnic groups. That shouldn't even be on the table for discussion. It should be solved long ago. And I would like to stick out my chin and head and the rest of it to say, maybe if we had been quicker in reaching what we promised in Agenda 2030, then we might have had better tools to approach the crisis we are in today. There will also be some of the humanitarian hard so-called Sustainable Development Goals we'll have to look into. And then we're talking about clean water and sanitation, safe food, and so on. And I'll tell you, the disruption to value chains, one of our ministers in Sweden the other day said, we have a risk of not being able to provide clean water unless we can get more drivers who are not sick in the transport sector. Now, that is our local value chain. The chemicals are being produced in a factory in Sweden, and the cleaning plants installations are in Sweden, but we don't have enough drivers to drive them from one point to another. So clean water and sanitation and safe food will be very important to look at. So the new normal we create has to be sustainable and contribute to increased sustainability. So my key messages, they are four. Embrace new technology to achieve sustainable and value-adding services. Work to a triple bottom line: functionality, safety, sustainability. With every step you take, ask yourself, how does this contribute to achieving the promise of Agenda 2030? Let the SDGs lead you, let values lead you. You will still earn money, so that won't be a problem. And have contingency plans for risks with disruptive effects. Thank you.
Thank you, Merih. Gosh, you've given us quite a lot of food for thought there. But I'd like to hand over to Xiao. Xiao, your views on how to adapt and evolve?
Thank you, Ersi. The pandemic will cause a great change in businesses and how they operate. Talking about accreditation, the role of accredited certificates, I believe in supporting trade, regulators, organizations, consumers, and the environment will be further enhanced as a result of this pandemic. Some examples, for example, in the current situation, the accredited quality management system certification helps certified organizations to prepare for managing crisis situations better. The accredited occupational health and safety management system certification helps those certified organizations to prevent the spread of COVID-19 within the certified organizations. And accredited environmental management system certification helps those certified health organizations to manage medical waste to prevent spread of infection. These are just some examples. So more accredited certification can be used. The global economy is supported to return to growth. The remote auditing and assessment tools will help certified organizations to be ready to spring back to support the economic and the social impacts of this pandemic. The COVID-19 situation has greatly speeded up the use of a new technology to conduct remote auditing and assessment. IF Executive Committee just discussed the experiences in this period and the implementation of a new IF strategic plan. And we will further share experience among IF members from this situation. And we will further push forward the use of digital tools in accreditation and accredited certification activities in line with the development of the fourth industrial revolution. For specifics, the key documents of IF ID3, we have this important document to deal with the current crisis. The name is Management of Extraordinary Events or Circumstances Affecting Accreditation Bodies, Conformity Assessment Bodies, and Certified Organizations. And another IF important document, MD4, that is for remote assessment auditing. So these documents are being given the precedent to the test during this crisis. And we see they have stood up very strongly. But in the meantime, given the intense use they have had, I will use this opportunity to review those documents to see if this situation provides any lessons learned for these documents in enhancement. We don't expect to have a similar crisis to occur in the future. However, we should be always prepared, and the relevant IF documents demonstrate the importance of preparedness. We will continue and enhance our work in this way to maintain the confidence of the global system for accreditation, to help and support accreditation bodies, conform the assessment bodies, and in the end, the market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xiao, for your interesting insights. Before we go to question and answer session, I'd like to give the floor back to UNIDO. Bernardo, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I will try to be very brief, but highlight from our perspective. Certainly, more on a personal note, what I ask myself, are we going to get back on track, or will be a coming back, or we are just not going to see the same situation again? The change will be so profound that we are moving into a new situation. The change has been very deep. I think, and following a bit what Merih was elaborating, we were in the process of trying to understand the technological revolution. We had never seen an acceleration of technological change ever. And in this context where we were trying to understand, we were saying, yes, we need sustainability. We have the mega trend, the migration, we have climate change. But the big question is, how do we adopt it? As UNIDO, we are looking how to help developing countries to do that. How do they get prepared for the new industrial revolution, to these new technologies? But COVID-19 and the crisis has precipitated this process. For me, this is changing completely the game, because digitalization is here now to stay with us. While I fully see a strong role for standards and quality, I think in the post-recovery, it will be the time for innovation and for new technological development. And certainly, the QIs plays a very important role in relation to that as well. And the big concepts trying to remain a bit at the high level are readiness, being prepared, being flexible, being adaptive, but also it is a time for coherence, for more coordination. This crisis shows us how important it is that we cooperate, but I'm still impressed. We are here, the panelists from so many in different places. We have the participants from all over the world, and this is happening. Can we get back to our desk and forget this experience we're having today and say, no, we will do another conference again? No, we will have learned. We have to adapt a new situation. We have to adapt to remote working. Institutions like ISO, probably they are more forward on that, but in the UN we're still working 8 hours a day in our offices, and there is no room for flexibility. We need to embrace distance learning. We need really to embrace this digital revolution. Just one word on what we can do in relation to quality and standards. It was elaborated by the respective institutions, but at the policy level, I think that it shows that quality policy helps to be prepared. And I think that we are finalizing a work on laboratory policy, and this will be very helpful because the countries need to have a systematic and structured response to how the laboratory system evolves. And this crisis is showing that in many countries this is not the case. So I think that this will give another input to that stream of work. And certainly we have also as UNIDO, and this is part of the reflection, that we as UNIDO, we think that we have to call on this convening power we have, and we need to dedicate more for joint advocacy. And these are the type of events that we can do together with the technical institutions, partnering with other UN organizations. But we need to work also in countries a bit broader thinking on the business environment, on technological foresight, and all these elements that I think very nicely Merih has disaggregated, in particular in the supply chain, how we help them to adopt these new technologies. But also, and I saw in some questions, we have to think how we can support more this population that is really unprotected. Because one thing this crisis has shown is that we have a societal divide, and that there is a segment of society that is completely unprotected, and we need to think also from our perspective much more for these groups of people, for these groups of countries. I would like to leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernardo. Yes, I agree. After this webinar, there's no way we can just go and say, oh, well, we had if somebody says, how was the webinar? We say, oh, it was fine. We're going to have to really distill what has been discussed and put together some good proposals. Now, before we do that, I would like to indicate that we've had over 100 questions submitted. Now, we have about 15-20 minutes to attend to questions. For those, the two people in the background, Juan Pablo and Nora, have been aggregating the most commonly asked questions. And at the moment, let me just quickly look here. We've aggregated them into about 14 questions. That, I'm not even sure we will get through all that, because 14 questions and 20 minutes is just about 1 and a bit minutes per question. But for the questions that you think we haven't addressed, we do know where the questions have come from. And as I promised before, we will make sure that we give you some kind of response. So I hope that that's going to be acceptable to everybody. So what I would like to suggest now, and Bernardo, I think that you've already preempted, I think you must have seen these questions. I think you've already preempted, because the first question is going to go to you. What should change in quality policy in the future in relation to COVID-19? If you could give us a quick response.
honestly, I didn't have a chance to see that question. I browsed through the questions, but I think it's about this resilience. It's about readiness. We have eventually to go back to the guiding principles and see how countries and institutions and companies and laboratories are better prepared, and how after a crisis they come back to fit again. And I believe that this part in general is there, but when we look at the standards, also the standards on risk management are not so updated. The standards on resilience is not so updated. So we have elements of that there, but I think that they in updating them and making them more introduced in the elements that we have to deal with, and certainly in relation more specific to the crisis, I think lab policy and what we can do there is very relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernardo. So laboratory policy, we can expect to see something developed there. The second question we have here is, how do we get the political leadership of developing countries with weak governance systems to engage in developing a national quality infrastructure? Now, ideally, I would have liked to say, Bernardo, you answer this, but I think I would like to ask the panelist, which one, or the other panelist, which one of you are happy to put up your hand and say, I will make an attempt to answer this? Merih.
Yes, I'm being brave again. I remember it was at the, I think, WTO side event, if I'm not mistaken. There was a similar question, a question where someone said, when we don't have roads and bridges, how can we convince our government that quality infrastructure is important? And I responded saying, what we keep forgetting when we talk about QI is the fact that it's not just something for trade and business. Quality infrastructure is there for the safety and security of our citizens. You can build as many roads and bridges as you like. If they collapse in the next storm, how are you going to tell your citizens that, oops, we forgot to test the concrete, or we didn't quite use the right steel or the right iron products? So testing, measurement, certification, the full quality infra and standards, let's not forget them. I keep forgetting Sean. They are all part of how we do everything correctly. We build bridges, but they should not collapse when we have flooding. We have roads, they should not collapse when we have flooding. People have to rely on the fact that they can drink the water. They should be able to feel safe. They should take it for granted. And if they are to be able to take it for granted, you have to have a quality infrastructure. It's as simple as that. And that message has to go through to the politicians, to the decision makers. Quality infrastructure is sexy, actually, in a political way, because it helps you do the things you want to do. You can do them in the right way if you use all the institutions of the quality infrastructure, and you protect your citizens. If they're protected, they feel safe and they vote for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Merih. Let's move on to another question. And this one has to do with supply chain. The question is, we have already seen that COVID-19 has disrupted international supply chains and changed demand patterns for goods, for foods. It is foreseeable that this may compromise food safety and quality. What modifications to our current tools are required to ensure that such risks are effectively managed during the crisis, especially for populations vulnerable to food insecurity? I think this question has multiple facets. Xiao, would you like to attend this one?
Thank you. It's clear accreditation and in particular accredited certification, and definitely also the testing inspection have an important role to support the global supply chain, including the supply chain of food industry. So in this regard, from our point of view, we need to allow our accreditation bodies and certification bodies to continue their certification activity to support the supply chain of food industry. So again, in this regard, IF provides tools for member bodies, for certification bodies to utilize a new technology to conduct relevant certification and accreditation activities. So in this we contribute to support the stability of the supply chain of food industry. So actually we just for IF we have a food working group created a specific task force, then develop a paper regarding remote auditing activities for food safety certification. So we try to actually get the views from different parties, from accreditation body and from certain bodies, and also from food safety scheme owners. So we put together a paper trying to explain how new technology to utilize in the certification and accreditation in the food certification sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiao. Sean, I was going to invite you to also do an intervention. And Andy, I think if you can also briefly touch on this, I think this is a really important question.
So, sorry, I think I'm going to talk about it from a conformity assessment perspective. And I think we've got to bear in the back of our minds that no matter what, we've got to maintain the confidence that people have in whatever gets delivered to their door during a pandemic. But we've also got to explore the flexibility or the range of flexibility that we can allow within our standards. And I don't think we've done that with regards to the conformity assessment activities. That we've tended to be very conservative in terms of specifying conformity assessment activities and taking a conservative approach. And that's part of what we do because we like to build confidence. And I think now after this pandemic, we need to sit back and we need to explore further how flexible do our standards need to be able to accommodate these kind of issues without giving up or deteriorating the confidence that people can maintain in the result of that conformity assessment activity. And I think the remote assessment is one aspect of that. So I think that's a crucial, we need to re-examine our standards and see where we go forward from there.
Thank you, Sean. Andy?
Yeah, what I would like to reflect on is it's not that we have to do all the work when a pandemic or a crisis comes along. What we need to do is get greater recognition of the investments and what lies behind and is already doing a really fantastic job from the quality infrastructure and is there beforehand. We can measure pressure and temperature and so on reliably in different countries and know the results will be good. We do have methods to ensure competence through the accreditation system and so on. So part of what we have to do is a better advocacy to make sure that this confidence can be recognised, and as Sean said, that we don't necessarily need to have the bureaucratic processes that narrow things down. We can say, yes, the underpinnings are there. In this particular crisis, this particular moment, we need to open the gates a little bit more and have a wider interpretation, and we can do it in the knowledge that there is a sound foundation underneath it.
Thank you very much, Andy. Merih, if it's okay with you, I think previously you've given us quite a few inputs as to how testing laboratories will be involved in supply chains. I don't know if you want to add anything more?
No, not really, but I could again repeat the fact that we need to have trust. We need to have common standards and we need to have trust. I'll give you this is not about food safety, but it still influences the way, for example, developing countries do trade. The standards for organic food are so varying from country to country. There are huge differences where new pressures are being put on incoming goods to be labeled organic compared to the homegrown. This is just an example, and I'm sure similar examples can be given for other aspects of the food we consume and the food we import and export. So there is need for, I think there is a lot to do for the standardization bodies like ISO to make sure that standards are the same throughout the world. And then there is a great need to build trust that if the food or if the products I'm importing, which will result in a certain type of food, processed food product, that they are tested in their origin, and I trust them because I trust that testing, I trust that microbiological analysis. And I think all the time it goes back to trust. Unless we can build a global trust, we'll have problems in the global value chains.
Thank you. I spent quite a bit of time on that because I think the answer pertains to not just the food industry, but could be a lot wider than that as well. I would like we'll come back to this issue about remote auditing. There seems to be some concern about how that will work. But the next question I'd like to pose is it's a question to you, Sean, to ISO. The fragmented landscape of global standards for PPE undermines ability of national governments to mobilize adequate PPE to protect medical personnel and citizens. Is there any initiative by ISO to harmonize relevant standards at global level? Over to you, Sean.
Yes, I mean, in terms of harmonization of standards, it comes back to what Merih Malmqvist just discussed now, is the best position to be in is if we've got a set of harmonized standards at the global level that address the core needs of whatever it is. So ISO is always working towards that end in terms of creating a set of standards at the global level that are harmonized with the world's best experts. I think as in direct relation to PPE, I can't speak now at the moment because I'm unaware of any activity to draw a standard together that addresses PPE. But I will say is that we have got global standards related to different aspects of PPE. So if you look at medical devices, if you look at ventilators, if you look at gloves and you look at masks, there are international standards. And it's really, I suppose, promoting a better knowledge that these standards already exist in terms of PPE.
Thank you, Sean. Another question for you, Sean, which I think you may have touched on during your intervention, but maybe you want to just elaborate a little bit more. It says, what can ISO do to speed up the development of international standards for items needed to fight against the virus where international standards do not currently exist?
So I think there are mechanisms already in existence in ISO that can be used. So within ISO, in terms of the standards development process, there are different choices that technical committees can make in terms of the timelines that they use to develop these standards. And these range from 24 months up to 48 months. I think there is a bit of a tendency in many industries or many technical committees to pick a longer development time because they are balancing the contribution and the availability of the experts in terms of developing these standards. But technical committees have the opportunity to look at developing them within a reasonable time limit. I think in addition to that, the Technical Management Board will probably look at the lessons that we need to learn from this in terms of what we need to change in terms of our process, what we need to add, etc. with regards to that. But I think it's also a case of educating technical committees to actually bite the bullet and to take the fast development time. If we look at what has happened, it's very often persuading people to take that step change, to instead of picking the 24-month development process, to pick the 12-month, to set themselves the challenge, etc. And I think this pandemic has taught everyone that people, once they're forced to interact on e-commerce or telemedicine, that they do enjoy it, they do like it, they do get familiar with it, and it's persuading them to take that step change.
Thank you, Sean. An interesting question here says, should quality infrastructure institutions be flexible in meeting standards and conformity assessment in times of COVID-19? Xiao, I think I'm going to give this one to you again.
Oh, sorry. So you can hear me? Okay. Yes, the answer is yes. So as I mentioned that IF provides tools for the accrediting bodies and certain bodies to conduct remote auditing and assessment by using new technologies. So before pandemic, very few accrediting bodies and certain bodies utilize this approach. And this approach really helped to continue the accredited certification activity in response to the current situation. And this is, I mean, the remote auditing and assessment by using the new technology, the digital tools is helpful and acceptable tool. And also on the other hand, for example, we publish some we call FAQs. For example, if it's not possible for certificate bodies to perform auditing activities either physically at the location of the organization or even remotely by using a new technology. And also if the conditions recommended by IF specific document are satisfied, then all the conformity assessment activities, including surveillance, recertification, may be postponed for up to 6 months. And also the validity of respective certificates may be also then extended for a corresponding period of up to 6 months. Actually, if we look at the current respective standard, so ISO IEC 1721-1 and also ISO IEC 17/65 for the management system certification, for product certification. So there is no this kind of provisions, requirements, or allow this approach. But then during this situation, we do have a specific document to manage the extraordinary events. So we do have an arrangement to allow the certain bodies to postpone the relevant activities based on some conditions. So yes, again, the answer is we need to consider some flexibility. Of course, then we also need to consider to ensure the confidence of the certification activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Xiao. You know, I should have had somebody flagging a red card at me. I've just noticed that we are 20 minutes over time, and I sincerely apologize for that. I was so intrigued by it, but nobody sort of rang a bell to say, oh, I've got a red card now. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Merih. Okay, so I think as important as all these things are, I'm going to have to be wrapping up with your good permission. But as I did promise that we will attend to questions afterwards. We have your email addresses and we will see what we can do. We're not promising it for today, but I think we will soon attend to them. And the panelists, I count on your cooperation to assist us in answering the questions. That's a deal? Yes, all of you? It's a deal. Thank you so much. Right, so let me go to the wrap up. And I would like to say thank you to the panelists for your contribution to the discussion and the insights that you have provided during both rounds of questions. And also the responses that you've given to the questions from the panelists, from the participants. What is clear to me is that we are facing many, many, many challenges, but at the same time, we are also facing some very good opportunities in our new world of work. It is also a unique opportunity for us, I believe, as quality infrastructure institutions, to really position ourselves uniquely in the world as to the service that we provide for the protection of the health and safety of our consumers, our citizens, the fauna and flora of our countries. And that the critic, and as somebody said, we need to do more advocacy on the role of quality infrastructure. That would be absolutely critical going forward. I would like to say a special word of thanks also to the 307 participants for joining and listening to the discussions. We are confident that the insights that you have gained as to how to support the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic and the adjustments that we will need to make going into the future, the medium and long term, that you have found this worthwhile spending the afternoon on. We would also like to thank you for the questions that you have posed. In fact, we've been overwhelmed with the questions, and time constraints did not allow that we could answer them all. However, we would like to encourage you to continue dialogue amongst each other, your various institutions, and so on. Then, last but not least, I would like to thank the two behind-the-scene workers, Juan Pablo de Villa and Nora Dayanang, for the logistics and for making this event happening. If it was not for the two of them, I don't think we probably would have pulled this off, because we had many objections as to the short notice, etc., etc. But I think it was worth pushing through and getting this done because of the criticalness of the situation. Let me also indicate that we have made a video recording of the proceedings. We will make it available on the UNIDO website, and we will let you know when that becomes available. So, as we head into the weekend, I would like to encourage everyone to enjoy the weekend. See you back at work on Monday, those who are back at work on Monday, and above all, stay safe. Greetings from Pretoria, South Africa. Thank you for your time.